The pastels of the early equinox make way for brilliant yellows as the grand ball of spring kicks off. Dainty-petaled Senecio aura blazes with a canary hue, standing all together like partygoers by the punch bowl. Critolus lutea shakes its pale, buttery bells out above lacy leaves, a common flower, but in finery. And woodland poppies pour out in cups of gold, catching the sun's glances without a care. The archangel dances, one white and green leaf at a time, over worn-out steps, flaunting yellow-capped spires. And the dandelions join in on the fun, trumpeting out blossoms for an unappreciative audience. Everywhere there is golden beauty, even in the weeds. Spring has only just begun, but it begins so merrily. Welcome to Games in the Glade, a stress-free gaming news and reviews podcast. I'm your host, Tina Kelly, and I'll be guiding you through some of the recent news in the gaming world, as well as telling you about a game I think you'll enjoy. Today I'll be discussing the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, new offerings from the Nintendo Switch Online subscription service, GTA 5 removing transphobic content, Baldur's Gate 3, Xenoblade Chronicles 3's launch dates, Digimon Survive's new release date, and the remaster for Klonoa Phantasy Reverie Series Remaster. Finally, I'll tell you what games you said had the most appetizing food, give my full-on review of TUNIC, and finish up by asking you about your favorite video game merchandise or art. Tribute Games, developer of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge game, announced that their retro-style TMNT beat-em-up will be releasing this summer for the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and S, PC, and Nintendo Switch. According to Ryan McCaffrey over at IGN, they also announced that the voice actors who played the Turtles in the original cartoon series in the 80s will be voicing the characters in-game as well. The game is getting both a physical release and a digital launch simultaneously, which is good news for game collectors and also Teenage Needle Teal fans. If you'd like to learn more about Shredder's Revenge, you can check out McCaffrey's article, TMNT Shredder's Revenge Gets Release Window, New Gameplay, over at IGN. I'll link to that article in the description of this episode. Nintendo likes to refresh its subscription offerings each month, drip-feeding subscribers with a few new classic games to their library. And in April, they added Mario Golf to their N64 expansion service. Additionally, they beefed up their Sega Genesis catalog with Sonic Spinball, Shining Force 2, and Space Harriers 2. My exposure to Space Harrier has only come recently, since I'm playing Yakuza 0, and there's a Sega arcade built into the nightlife city of Kamurocho, so you can visit the arcade there and play Space Harrier anytime you want. Space Harrier 1, though. Now, my brother's a big fan of the Shining Force franchise, but I never played it growing up. It's a tactical RPG with turn-based combat, and up until about last year, I didn't think I was smart enough to play tactical games. I also had a ton of fun watching a friend of mine, Lodi, play Shining Force, all the games, actually, on Twitch a year or so ago, and before that, I wasn't really interested in tactics RPGs. And then, of course, I found Fire Emblem Three Houses, and I'm a tactics girl now. And finally, Sonic Spinball, the last game they added to the Sega catalog, is a classic pinball game starring everyone's favorite blue blur, bouncing around maps and trying to defeat Dr. Eggman in his various forms. If you'd like to read more about those games and their history, you can check out Pam K. Ferdinand's article over on Game Rant, a link to which I have already included in the description of this episode. And another chunk of good news for you. GTA 5 is getting a next-gen port because, of course it is, but this remastered version will no longer feature the unflattering caricatures of drag queens and trans people who would spawn outside of the Cockatoos nightclub. According to Outmaking Games, the organization that years ago wrote an open letter to Rockstar asking for the removal of these stereotypical characters, the models still do exist in some form in the director's mode of the game, but all of their dialogue options have been removed, which means the protagonist will no longer be able to inquire if they are using hormones or not. Now, I hope that Rockstar will consider working with trans folks and also drag queens and drag performers in the future, because there are so many hilarious drag queens and drag performers out there that I could definitely see being rich characters in a GTA game. And I hope that the next time they want to include trans people in the game, they'll get those writers in the room, because games can absolutely feature trans characters, queer characters, and make them really funny. But the people that those characters represent should be in on the joke from the very beginning, so that it really lands, you know? So thanks to Making Games so much for their news piece. Rockstar Games removed transphobic content from GTA 5. And as well, thank you to Kat Bailey for their article, Rockstar quietly removes GTA 5 content described as transphobic from next-gen releases, over on IGN. I'll link to both those pieces in the description of this episode. Larian Studios, the developer of Baldur's Gate, has announced that Baldur's Gate 3 will be fully released in 2023. Back in February of this year, the studio's head, Sven Vinke, announced that 2022 would be the last year of development for the game, which seems to be confirmed by the dev diaries that was released last week. Baldur's Gate 3 launched in early access in 2020, so I'm betting that the full release in 2023 will be packed with all the gaming content that a D&D fan could ever want. For more information on the release, check out the dev diary on YouTube, or you can read Adam Bankhurst's article over on IGN. I will link both of those in the description of this episode. If you're an RPG fan, you've probably heard of Xenoblade Chronicles, even if you haven't played the franchise. Heck, you might have even seen Xenoblade crossovers, like the Xenoblade Chronicles armor sets in Breath of the Wild. That's where I personally first heard of the franchise, which surprisingly doesn't seem to have a huge audience here in America. That all might change this July, because Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has moved up to a July 29th release date, months sooner than its tentative September release date of this year. This latest iteration of Xenoblade will have the franchise's characteristic overworld battles with party-based fights, and you'll be able to control each character's actions in battle, as well as join pairs together during the battle to perform special interlink attacks that can change the course of things. There's also a class change feature, so you can customize your party as you wish, so your playthrough might end up looking very different from everyone else's. If you'd like to learn more about Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I'll include a link to the Business Wire article on its launch in the description of this episode. Guess what else is releasing in late July? Digimon Survive, of course. The latest offering from those cool digital pets, Digimon Survive is a visual novel with survival strategy RPG elements. It stars a cast of high schoolers who get lost in the woods during a field trip, and who end up in a strange new world of Digimon, of course. The battles they fight and the decisions they make may shape their story and even affect the final battles you face at the end of the game, so this one sounds like it has a lot of replay value. I wonder if there's going to be any tension for RPG fans who have to pick between Xenoblade Chronicles and Digimon, because they're both launching July 29th, oddly enough. If you want to read more on Survive, check out Ethan Gach's article, Digimon Survive is coming out the same day as Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which is on Kotaku, and I will link that for you in the description of this episode. July is shaping up to be quite a hot month for game releases. Early July will see the release of the remaster of the Klonoa Phantasy Reverie Series, courtesy of Bandai Namco, and will be available on the PS4 and PS5, the Xbox Series X and S, the Xbox One, and on Steam. No news yet, so far as I've seen, for a Switch release. The remaster will have hard and easy difficulty modes. You have to clear the game first on easy to unlock the hard difficulty. It'll have optional tutorials, 2-player support mode, and a challenging stopwatch mode for players with a penchant for challenging missions. You know, my brother was just lamenting to me the other day that we don't see a lot of grabber platformers anymore, whereas when we were kids there were games like Klonoa, Tomba, and Mischief Makers, but thankfully here comes a little revival for Klonoa. And he also pointed me towards Double Shake, which is a 2.5D platformer that has you grabbing, shaking, and throwing and kicking your way through enemies and obstacles, much in the style of those classic games. So if you're a grab-former fan, or however you'd like to call it, I hope you enjoy this Klonoa remaster, and also Double Shake, the latter of which has a free demo right now, by the way, on itch.io. I'll link to Bandai Namco's page on Klonoa, as well as the free demo of Double Shake in the description of this episode. Last episode, I asked you all what food from video games makes you wish you could dive right in and grab a bowl for yourself. And maybe those games also inspired you to cook something too. Here's how you responded. Anna Wayfinder on Twitter said that their favorite food in video games has to go to Final Fantasy 15. They said that they definitely wanted to make the food from Final Fantasy 15 and that the community actually made an unofficial cookbook so that fans could replicate the meals. And it even included an image from the game of like a little pie, and it has a side of berries and a scoop of ice cream, and it looks so good. I haven't played Final Fantasy 15 yet, but now I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you very much, Anna, for that recommendation. Largo Sama on Twitter said that they wanted to eat the food and drink the tea from Fire Emblem Three Houses. Aside from its silly flat JPEGs of fruit that are on display in the market, Fire Emblem Three Houses actually has some tasty meals and dainty treats, which they showcase at Tea Time, which is a special event that you and your staff and students can share. Largo Sama said that they loved that the meals and the tea are social events in the game, because nothing is better than sharing a meal with friends. And I have to agree, good company makes food taste even better. And Chain Snake echoed Anna Wayfinder's response about Final Fantasy 15 cuisine because it was the most realistic food he had ever seen in the game. But he also gave an honorable mention to Monster Hunter's feline fresh offerings. I think that a burly chef cat makes you some cool meals in Monster Hunter World, and they always end up looking like a king-sized feast of everything tasty. So that's a good recommendation there. I really hope we get to see more tasty food in video games, because even if they're like little food critters like in Bugsnax, I love seeing representation of food in games because it's cute, it's fun, and it's a great way to get inspired to make good food for ourselves too. So thank you to everybody who responded. On to the review. Last episode, I was just a few days away from beating Tunic, which is a game by Andrew Schuldice and published by Finji. It's a puzzle action adventure game starring a cute little fox in a tunic who is seeking a way to change the world. Last episode, I discussed some of the main draws that the game has for me, like its tangible retro feel, the limited verbal communication, and the layered narrative. This time around, I want to talk about some of the core aspects of the game that make it my top contender for Game of the Year. And those are the soundtrack, the combat, the way the world reveals itself, and the rich but concise narrative. Normally, I don't lead off with the soundtrack, but I feel that Tunic's soundtrack is simultaneously so unique and so unlike anything I've ever heard before, while also harkening back to games from my childhood that I need to bring it to the fore. I picked out a few tracks to demonstrate this, but first off, the OST for Tunic is a joint production between Lifeformed and Genies Kwan. Now for some folks, Lifeformed might sound familiar. If you've ever played the 2012 platformer Dust Force, that game was also scored by Lifeformed, and after giving some of the tracks from that game a listen, I can say that the music is certainly in the same vein. It's vibey, it's ethereal, it's mystical, but it has a great beat. When I was thumbing through the Tunic OST on YouTube, I noticed that the track Remembered to Remember had a lot of comments on it about how it reminded listeners of Dust Force. So let's give that a listen. It's such a tender, sweeping, beautiful song, carried forward by the piano. I really enjoy the soft touches of percussion on this one too. This song plays in Tunic's hub area called the Overworld, whenever you step into a room that isn't the old house. The name Remembered to Remember is fitting because the first time I heard this track, I think I was in a room with several open treasure chests, with only one closed one, as if somebody had been there before. Or maybe I had been there before and forgotten. Some pieces of information, some shared memory, it was missing there, but I didn't know what. I feel like this song captures that very odd feeling of quiet uncertainty, but you push through it in a situation like that. You see that the chest is still there, and you're just hoping that that unopened one has what you need in it. So, Remember to Remember sounds a lot like Dust Force to some people, and you know what? That one's a bit of a gimme because it's composed by the same people. But a track that's reminiscent of other games for me is Hex Sequence. There's something about the instrumentation of Hex Sequence and the beat that makes me think of tracks from The Legend of Zelda, like the Fairy Fountain almost. Those short bursts of notes strumming like an emulated harp makes me think of classic Fairy Fountain music in The Legend of Zelda. But I did see that somebody in the comments said that this one reminded them of a track from Fez, which is another game I feel like TUNIC gets some comparisons to, particularly in its use of puzzles. Fez also released in 2012, just like Dust Force, and it was a 3D puzzle platformer that had you turning the world around to help you solve puzzles. There's a puzzle that's a little bit like that, actually, in TUNIC, where you ascend a tower and you have to trace the path that you took to get up there in order to map out a segment of the solution to the puzzle. So I find it interesting that there's so much crossover between the mechanics and the music of TUNIC and the mechanics and music of other games. Okay, the last track that I want to talk about, that I feel like the composers blended with a sense of nostalgia in the tunes, is the Redwood Colonnade. It's a dreamy tune with sustained synths and some mystical sounding wind instruments in it. This one made me think of Chrono Trigger for that reason, the wind instrument, while the gently tapped bongos made me think of Donkey Kong Country. Here it is. I don't know if that's a kind of flute or a pipe or an ocarina or something, but it's so wistful and almost mournful. It's like a howl coming from the woods in the middle of the night. I remember hearing instruments like that, but emulated and pushed through the SNES's sound card when I played games like Chrono Trigger. I think there's a forest level with music kind of like that in it that left me feeling mesmerized when I played the game a few years ago. I could pull the whole OST for this. In fact, I'm not even going to talk about some of my favorite tunes like Subterra or Fluxizon, but go listen to those. The OST is on YouTube, of course. However, I'm going to round out with one track which just warms me to the core and hits that nostalgia factor in a palpable sense. It's called Sunset Breakfast, and it plays when you're inside the old house in the overworld. It's a place where the hero can rest, reflect, and plan. Here's the song. Whenever I wanted to read the manual, I would go back to the old house, and I would have this lovely tune playing in the background while I tried to decipher the runic language on each page. It was the perfect, gentle music to puzzle things out to, the perfect, cozy little home to retreat to when I didn't know what to do next. The song fits the environment perfectly. There's a reminiscence and a comfort to it, as well as a slight melancholy of an abandoned place that was once much loved. I feel like Sunset Breakfast exemplifies the brilliance of TUNIC's soundtrack because it merges feeling, environment, and beauty into one. It creates the space that it plays in just as much as the visual elements do. And that's a remarkable thing for a soundtrack to do, I think. Now let's touch on some of the other elements of the game that'll really bring you in, I think. Like the combat. I think TUNIC is great because of its challenging combat, which some folks have compared to Dark Souls, although I think comparisons like that are tenuous at best. Sure, you have a sword and you hit things with it, kind of like in Dark Souls. And yes, you have magic, kind of like in Dark Souls, and stamina and HP, and you can dodge roll, and you can heal yourself with flasks. They're not Estus. I think, well, I don't want to tell you what they are. It might be a spoiler. But anyway, you can also parry. Just like in Dark Souls. Parrying is a fully viable mechanic, by the way, because I know that because I had to do it, because I was unprepared for a boss I ran into. I ran into a boss that people usually fight like third, and it was the first of the major bosses that I fought, and I wasn't doing a lot of damage because I didn't have the resources yet to do a lot of damage, but you know, it was very rewarding. I learned a lot, and I got a lot of good parries off. I felt like a parry god. But if you don't like combat, I have good news for you. You can enable a few options to make the combat in TUNIC less challenging. You have the option to enable infinite stamina, so you can just dodge roll to your heart's content and not have to worry about taking the extra damage. Because as the fox in the manual helpfully points out in English, one of the very few instances of English in the manual, everything hurts more when I am tired. Now, if that's not helping, you can also enable no fail mode, which means that you won't die when you receive heaps of damage. You'll still be faced with foes, of course, but they can't hurt you anymore, so you won't be attempting boss fights over and over and over again. I like these options, honestly. They're meant to make games more enjoyable, because games should be enjoyable. Some folks really enjoy combat, and Tunic has lovely combat. But some folks would rather not spend an hour hitting their head up against a wall until they learn how to perfectly parry it. And that's great. They can still get all the story beats. They can understand the way that the world works in Tunic. And they'll still get the same ending or endings that somebody who fought their way there got. And regarding that narrative, I know I touched on it a little bit in the previous episode, but I'm going to obliquely touch on it some more in this one because I just adore the game and its story. So the narrative in Tunic reveals itself slowly. At first you wake up as a little fox on a beach, which is very Link's Awakening, by the way. And you're given very few written instructions that you can actually parse from the outset. What I understood from my first few hours of gameplay was gleaned mainly through pantomime or the broken English scattered throughout the manual pages that I had collected. I ran into a big blue spirit fox that was locked away in some kind of prison, and she gestured at me. Through her pantomime, I figured that I had to free her. And from the manual pages, which were written mostly in a fabricated language and peppered with English here and there, I learned that I would need to ring 2 bells, one in the east and one in the west, after, of course, acquiring a suitable weapon, something better than the stick that I had found. There are helpful pictures in the manual that illustrate key concepts. Push this button to dodge or hold it to run. Don't let your stamina get this low or you'll be weakened. And the maps in the manual have a nifty little tracker icon to show you where you are on the map at all times. So figuring out where to go and what to do is fairly simple. From there, the environment reveals a little bit of the story as you progress through it. For instance, my first thought upon entering the old house that I mentioned earlier, which was filled with props that looked like the same items I used to upgrade my HP and my strength, was that there might have been a hero here before me. Who else would collect all this junk? And maybe there had been many heroes, as I found so many open chests and rooms which only had 1 or 2 left for me to plunder. That same feeling of somebody having been in those places continues in the manual as well, which I know I talked about in the previous episode. But in the manual, there's indications of interesting places or paths you may not be able to see, hidden secrets. They're scattered all throughout the overworld, the West Gardens, the Eastern Forest, and beyond, which were all in ruins by the time I had come to them. There were crumbled buildings there, fallen pillars, and wrecks of machines that I couldn't figure out the purpose of, until of course I fought them. It's normal in a fantasy or fantasy-inspired game to find ruined castles and mossy piles of rubble, but a machine that wields a laser sword gun thing? It stood out so severely from the environment that I was fascinated and I had to learn more. I paid more attention to my surroundings after that. What were the turrets shooting beams for? And why was there an RGB strip running under the walkways and through buildings? Why does it surge purple? There was something off about it that I wanted to investigate, and as it turns out, that power and those machines were critical parts of Tunic's lore and story. What powers the world in Tunic is the very same thing that led to its ruin. The way that Tunic draws you into its story through the strange things in its landscape is so natural, because Tunic is a game about discovery. It's a game about learning more about the world so you can navigate it easier. One of my mods on Twitch, thanks Alex by the way, I appreciate it, called the game a knowledge-gated game. Whereas some games like Metroidvanias are item-gated or ability-gated, allowing you to progress through certain areas if you have a key or a tool, Tunic allows you to get through secret areas to find hidden connections when you, the player, discover them. If you know all the shortcuts from the game from the very beginning, you can make very short work of the overworld and probably never have to fight a single enemy there. But it's the joy of discovery that's at the core of Tunic. Discovering paths, discovering the purpose of certain places and items, discovering the truth of the world. And with discovery comes wisdom, and with wisdom comes the pleasure of sharing what you know with others. I had the delight of sharing my experience with my community on Twitch, reading passages of Runic to them, finding little secrets, and even using methods of solving puzzles that they had never seen before. Tunic feels like one of those games that you would talk about on the playground and share your experience with, talking to other kids about solutions to puzzles and whatever the toughest boss was. Sharing wisdom is actually even a theme of the game, as someone has passed a manual down to you, scattered page by page throughout the land. Some people might hoard that knowledge, protecting it like the librarian who keeps his pages sealed in glass domes. But others pass their notes down to you on those pages, leaving a breadcrumb trail behind to help you find your own path. And ultimately, sharing your knowledge of the world is what heals it in Tunic, in a way that I find beautiful. But I can't discuss it any further because I want you to experience that for yourself. Something I really appreciate about Tunic is how it manages to offer challenging combat, compelling world building, and rewarding puzzle solving all in a concise experience. As I said in my little preview last week, you can play and beat Tunic without exploring every nook and cranny, without solving every puzzle, and without getting both endings, and it's still a fun experience. You can challenge a final boss and begin your reign as the next heir, and from that gain a solid understanding of the world and its infinite struggles. But you can also go through the effort of finding the fairies hidden throughout the world by wielding the power of the Holy Cross. And you can open the tantalizing and immense door in the mountains by using all the knowledge you've gained on your journey. That door, by the way, is my favorite puzzle. For it, I took copious notes, I drew things, I spent so much time muttering directions to myself. And the solution was very satisfying. I feel like I achieved something grand by opening it. But I digress. You can go through Tunic at a glacial pace, solve every puzzle, get every achievement, and see the truth in about 30 or 40 hours, if you're as slow as me. I think that's remarkable. Other games that tout storytelling through the environment, challenging combat, or intense puzzle solving can stretch up to 60 or even 100 hours, just to see everything the game has to offer, sometimes even requiring multiple playthroughs. But there's something to be appreciated about Tunic's concision. It's rich and powerful without getting leggy. If I wanted to compare games like Tunic to something, I'd say that environmentally rich games with tight combat, deep lore, and intriguing puzzles are kind of like cherry cheesecake. It's decadent, but eating a whole cheesecake in one sitting would be difficult, maybe even exhausting. Some games give you that whole cheesecake, and you gotta work through it, bite by bite, slicing off what you could chew. Other games cut the slice for you, but you don't get the entire experience. Maybe they left off the cherries from the top, or maybe part of the graham cracker crust on the bottom broke off and didn't make it to your plate when it was transferred. You get part of the experience, but maybe not the whole. But Tunic is like a cherry cheesecake that was hit by a shrink ray. It's perfectly portioned, every element is balanced, and you can enjoy it in an evening or a weekend at your own pace. All told, Tunic is an experience, I guess, like so many other games, but unlike anything else that I've experienced. It's rewarding, it's fun, and it's challenging. I was taking notes for days, just muttering things to myself and my community, of course, translating things, tracking the story as it went on. I was thrilled and I was captivated. But overall, at the core of it, Tunic made me excited to learn more again. And that's an experience I think you would like too. I have a lot of video game merch scattered throughout my bedroom, many of which are gifts from members of my community. I've got a poster from Majora's Mask, I have a black and white print of The Hunter's Dream from Bloodborne, and I have a full-size painted portrait of Geralt of Rivia, among other things. My mom doesn't like that portrait. It kind of creeps her out a little bit. And also the folks at Finji sent me some really sweet things for Tunic, including this little finger puppet. Ah, so cute. I keep my chapstick in this. He hides it for me. But my favorite piece so far of video game merch is a denim hat with the Prince of the Cosmos from Katamari Damacy stitched into the top bit of it. I wear it almost every day on my walks to keep the sun off my face, and I bought it off of Fangamer from years ago. So I'd like to ask you this week, What is your favorite real-world item that you have that's inspired by a video game? It could be a jacket you bought because a character in a video game wore it. It could be a piece of merch featuring a character or maybe a logo. Or it could be some art you created yourself that takes up space in your room. And if it's appropriate, I'd like to see pictures of it too. But please do not feature anything in the picture you would not want, like me to see or my aunts to see on YouTube. I would appreciate that. If you'd like to respond, you have a few options. You can respond to the tweet that I'm going to tweet out, or you can tweet directly at Games in the Glade on Twitter using the GITGasks hashtag. Or if you're listening on YouTube, you can leave a comment below the video. That's all I have for you today. There'll be more news and reviews every other week, so keep an eye out for updates in your favorite podcatcher or on YouTube, and follow the show's Twitter account at Games in the Glade for more. This podcast is supported by Friends of the Forest on Patreon, a link for which I will leave in the description. Thank you to Puddles of Infinity for the use of their song Porches and Universes, and thank you to Titsay for the beautiful album art. And even though our time together is coming to an end, you can always find your way back here, my world-worn weary friend. There's a spot here in the clearing, in the quietude and shade, for you to relax a while and listen to Games in the Glade. Bye, everybody.